Cool. So I think before we jump into, your golf course, can you tell me a little bit about, like, your relationship to, I guess your relationship to, like, games and game-based technology? Because I know there's a bit of that in this work, even though it's not explicitly a game, like some of the other things that you've worked on in the past. But yeah, can you tell me, about how conceptually this work fits in with, like, some other, uh, interactions that you've had with, like, games as a medium, as an artist?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe to be disappointing up front, I don't have much of a relationship to games because I got to games through software.
Oh, okay.
Making my first games was making them in Unreal Engine, or not in Unreal, sorry, wow, in Unity. It was a way to make apps, and the like ability to gamify them was something as a way to reflect on what it means to use software today and its tendencies towards gamification. And so I'd rather see all of this within this big sludge of media, more generally the media that is at we're native to, that surrounds us, that tempts us, that is accessible on one hand, but maybe black box on the other hand. And so I'm interested more broadly in media and the ways that gets tangled up with things that we tend to say are maybe a little more physical or more present or more spatial. And so there's always that interplay. And so as far as the new project goes, it's still about that kind of culture of media, even if I'm not using the media directly. And so I tell various stories about how that media, computation more generally, and our spaces, our environments get rolled up into it. And so, for instance, one moment of real gamification is one of the stories I tell in this video, Your Golf Course Made My GPU, one of three stories. One of them is about a sand dredger that the giant Chinese company that makes this giant sand dredger says that it edits the map, right? And so it's like
Yeah.
using the parlance of games, of apps, of editability, of user authorship more broadly, and applies it to the scale of the earth in a scary way. And so that is one of the ways, or one of the ways that both that culture of media is present for all of us, and one of the ways that it's tangled up with the earth as a kind of giant environment.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're also asking, I think this has been, for people who play games, there is a real emphasis on, like, newer, better, faster. Games are interesting because they are, a medium that are very, at least for video games, they're very bound to technology. And so the things that are possible I mean, I guess the one nice thing about games is that oftentimes the things that are possible with games are, um, not just technology for technology's sake. So, advances in, multiplayer games, like, that's a function of, increased internet speeds, or like they do like enhancements in what happens with technology does open, like, new doorways to, like, doing new things with games in terms of creating persistent worlds. Although I do think we're sort of at a little bit of a, like, end of history
Mm.
moment where it's like I feel like we have enough. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think it's like, do games need to be, like, more realistic? Do you need, like, I don't think so. I think we're good. I think we're good for, like, another decade. Anyway, all that is to say, I do think for people who play games, they are not asking these questions about, like, where the technology ultimately comes from, and it's very abstract. It's extremely abstract in a way that, in a way, at least your work, for this particular piece kind of forces someone to be, like, presently, like, engaged with what that means to, have the newest PlayStation 5 or whatever that might be. Yeah.
And I think I think there's a big part of that work that has to do with like its particular materiality. So another example is a story of this very rare silica. This one specific mine in North Carolina that's a result of like geological effects from hundreds of millions of years ago is used to make all these microchips that surround us all the time that enable all this capacity, and at the same time becomes this golf course, or becomes the um, or the sand trap in the premier golf course in the U.S. And so there's a kind of story or a set of stories about how that stuff is super earthly and mineral and material and dirty in a way that we tend to overlook. But the other side of that I think you're getting at as well is like what is the extent, or what yeah, how far will we go for things? To what extent do we want to exhaust the Earth for like
Yeah.
more like better graphics, like better GPUs that like this sound enables more GPUs to get better compute on AI, etc. And so it tries to bring that and make it a little more present because it oftentimes is quite, yeah, in the distant, and then also covered up by marketing and these stories about like better and faster, or sorry, faster is always better or more is always better, and is that really a narrative that holds up? Sorry, I'm just gonna mute.
No
I'm
worries.
getting these notifications that are really annoying.
I can't hear them if that makes you feel any better.
No, but they're distracting me.
I mean, do you feel like I guess I feel like it's a bit of what is the phrase?
Catch 22.
No, it's more that like the technology pushes forward and then it's kind of like retconned into like its utility is like retconned into existence. So it's like we should make all this stuff, we should dig up the earth, we need more, and then like something good happens, or quote unquote good, so that might be AI. I guess I feel, I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm torn. I guess I feel like maybe it's different for engineers where they're very clearly can see like there's certain things I would like to be able to do, and we are bound by. I see with the VR is like a good example. Like they're just enhancements with like lens technology that we do not have to do things with immersive reality that we would like to, or battery storage. You can see like, oh, if we had this or that. But I guess I at the same time I'm like I also feel like those are kind of explained like after the fact, like the sand's already out of the earth at that point. It's not like we do like this research phase where like, okay, here's how much we need and we should do this amount of extraction and that amount of extraction. It's kind of like, no, do the extraction first, and that that engine's already running, and then we'll figure out what we're going to use it for afterwards. But yeah.
I think you're bringing up another kind of sentiment I was trying to sneak in with this work, which is like this, yeah, this sense of like a guilty pleasure or uncertainty that comes with like, I mean, yeah, I'm not saying I'm standing on some moral high ground. I'm struggling with the like temptation both for new things and for fascinating things, but also like trying to like not look at my phone,
Yeah,
a little bit
yeah.
more. And I think that's something we all struggle with, like what will give and what, yeah, trying to find a kind of artistic language for maybe dealing with that. I call it a kind of double bind. You know sometimes that something is happening behind the scenes, but you do it anyway. And the other thing you're mentioning is also, yeah, I mean, I think there's something to be said about the capabilities we're able to achieve technologically, but then the money that like is put down on the table to make it happen or to
Yeah.
keep that whole machine churning in a way.
Do you feel like your background in architecture makes you I don't know, cognizant of constraints? I was talking
Mhm.
to another architect, and he was telling me that like, for that line 2040 project, like the amount of steel that would be required if that came into existence is like more steel than like currently exists on the
Oh,
planet. And so you just like put this idea on paper, and you pay your consultants and you pay your architecture firm and you do all these renders, but like is totally unmoored from like the actual like lived constraints of being on the planet. So yeah, I'm just wondering, is like, is that idea of constraints, is that something that I don't know, was informed by your background or your interest in architecture?
no,
It's okay. I
I'm
might be
sure
imputing this.
no, no. I mean, I think it's a fair assumption, but I think maybe that was. I mean, maybe there's something about constraints that maybe not fit in so much in that kind of, and maybe stand outside of that training. And maybe this is why I'm an artist. Is like I feel less down. And I recognize maybe I'm talking about it at a sort of creative register, and I think you're talking about it at a kind of like conceptual register of how we see our world in a way. And yeah, I feel like I'm just maybe the constraints part is not the most thing I relate to immediately. No,
Yeah, no worries.
I mean I find them
Um,
helpful, but they're not the things that I relate to immediately.
yeah.
In a way.
For this particular piece, like process wise,
Hmm.
can you tell me about like the do your ideas like are you coming across things that you see or read in the world? You mentioned like coming across this Chinese sand dredger, or sort of seeing sand traps in golf. I'm just curious, like from a conception, because it's also it's a linear piece, and so and there's different elements to it in terms of the the disembodied voices, this dialogue between these two different characters set against like this like multi-stage imagery. But yeah, process wise, like where did this project kind of like, what was the initial seed or seed of inception for this particular work?
I think it's the material, and actually there was like a project before it, which was like discovering these silicon wafers, which is how I produce most of these prints or all of these prints, and wondering like really what is this material? Because I don't think of myself as the kind of guy that has any relationship to hardware. Actually,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
hardware scares me. Like I'm really comfortable in the screen on my laptop, like making something. And so I was printing on this material, but like really struggling to understand everything about it. For one, like, I get this thing called a silicon wafer. Is this whole thing a chip? No, it has hundreds of chips, but how is that produced? So really just like digging into that and putting myself in an uncomfortable position and then recognizing this kind of this question I keep coming back to, but finding it in this context, which is like, oh, it's this material it's this material that like enables the digital, but also enables this golf course is a really strange kind of coincidence. And so Sam then became this kind of central element that I keep stumbling across, because I think one of the things I try to get across in the video is how many different states it can take. One is a kind of well, yeah, it's an industrial product, sure, right? It can be like granule. They can be this quartz crystal, if again naturally is formed in a different way. I talk about that. You put it with cement and water, it becomes concrete. You can make silicone out of it. You can make, I think it's found like in toothpaste, like, and all these strange things. So it's these changes in states of matter made this like sand, this just giant thing that had these many stories that I was coming across. And as I was discovering these stories, I was just collecting lots of things. So that's part of the process as well. Like whether it's collecting 3D models in other contexts, or in this case, just videos and photos of just, the labs that they make wafers in, for instance, films, The Woman in the Dunes, if you know this film, this Japanese film, I love this one. Um, and then in this process of collecting, it's always trying to find a kind of what are the edges between these elements with conception, but also just very like materially and visually, like. And so this is where this building up or eroding of images, moving images on top of one another came about.
Hmm.
um and printing on the wafers kind of continued through as something that was there from before, from the beginning, this
Right.
previous project.
Right. Yeah, I mean that printing on the wafers, that effect is definitely present in the video work as well, like kind of the paying attention to like foreground and the background like
Mm.
simultaneously. I was also interested like the like presenting sand as a site of leisure. Like golf is a leisure sport, and so is biking down cycling down a sand dune or skiing down a sand dune, or and or seeing those beaches. Where's the that palm frond that palm
Dubai.
frond yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's again, it's meant to be like a place where you spend time, and like this transformation of this like this site of leisure and this like a site of like productivity or a site of technological advancement. This like transmutation of sand from one object to another. I mean, you're totally right. I just don't like, as someone who sits on the computer all day, like I definitely do not spend a lot of time thinking about like the hardware itself. So you're certainly encouraging me to think more.
Please run so I don't have to think about the hardware existing. And think one of the works I'm trying to think about now is like, maybe I should just make a chip that runs at the scale of deep time. Like, could Hello World take hundreds of millions of years to print?
Yeah.
And what would a chip look like? Like maybe it'd have to be like really thick and just have like a really long path to take to just print this one thing. Like, I don't know.
Oh,
I think
right.
there's something like a delivery at the speed of geological time.
Right, because like so much of chip design is like trying to like put things in the
Be
right.
efficient.
This is obviously a gross simplification, but there are like efficiencies to definitely efficiencies to like how the board is constructed and like how much speed you can get out of it. So if you worked against that, yeah, this like long, like a deliberately expansive process for like turning on their computer and just getting that first command like out the door. Um, can you tell me a bit about the like how the installation piece, how people have like responded to the video work to the installation? And obviously there's this backstory you have about having the piece like caught up in customs, which definitely feels like one of these, like I'm not making this up, like could not think of a more on the nose on the nose like practical operational coordination problem. But yeah, in terms of like how you were thinking about the installation and what you wanted people to kind of experience as they were interfacing with the multiple works around this same idea.
I'm sure I have an interesting answer for this.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I mean, I guess I return to this idea of like states of matter. How do you encounter these different states of matter? And I like to think of the wafer works as portals, and that's why also these frames become these important characters, and then they're all made as rings of sand in my studio that I scan and then print out. And so there's this kind of clearing away of this dusty matter to reveal this not quite otherworldly scenario, but it's otherworldly presentation of our Earth. These images are like constructions of or not constructions, but reappropriations of images by Botticelli, and key characters have been erased and replaced by, for instance, the Dubai fronds. Sorry, the Dubai Palm Island fronds.
TM
Or
trademark is trademark. So
there you go.
yeah, yeah.
Or the like lithography machine that costs hundreds of millions of dollars to produce and that print those actual wafers. And so I was seeing them as a kind of series of portals this time around, and it's quite weird. And this is quite different from how I usually present and construct work, which tends to be much more environmental, like one that one is in the situation and uses the software, sits at a kind of furnishing that I made. So that's what I'm more familiar with. But this time I'm treating them really as wall works. And instead, the central piece is the video, which was a 3-channel video. And because of that 3-channel and them being strung together and curving just a bit, they produce this kind of like horizontality that I was thinking of as like the horizon of the Earth again, as this thing that is beneath us and turning and kind of undergirds the whole project. And so it's difficult for me to talk about it because it's far, I don't want to say more conventional than usual, but a little more straightforward and
Yeah.
less environmental than
Yeah.
usual. Yeah.
You'd mentioned that in another interview that you empathize with sand, I think. And I was curious if you like being based in Zurich, do you miss sand at all? I mean, is that it's not part of it's not part of the environment in which you currently are. I live in Los Angeles, so like I do have the kind
You
of
get some.
optionality, both desert and beach, and if I want to get my hands on sand. But yeah, as a material, like you are quite far from it. So yeah, I was just curious if you have a personal. Uh,
I was just at the beach for 10 days.
okay.
This is why we were this is our vacation. No, I don't miss it. I think for me, maybe the thing that's a little more poignant is like you don't notice how much it travels.
Hmm.
And growing up, I moved around a lot, and I lived
Yeah,
in
yeah,
places with a lot of sand by
yeah, yeah.
coincidence as well. And culturally, there's some. I don't say that I relate to it, but it's a kind of background that is not surprising to me, and so maybe that's a little more present for me somehow. But then, maybe what this project has done is like helped me to recognize the way that A, dust kind of accumulates around us, and B, how present sand is otherwise. So that's been really interesting. And just how different sand is in different places, which is really dorky to say. But like when I was at the beach this last week, I was like, oh wow, like it's so fine here. Like it's so,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's really dumb, but it helped me to see that material in a new way. Um yeah, but then think about the places I lived, on the one hand, there's this kind of trope of it being kind of tabula rasa, right? Like sand is nothing there, but you go camp in the desert. And I remember the last day camping when I was in middle school. We went on a class trip, and we, just had the sand, or not sandbags, the sleeping bags out in the desert. Woke up like picked up my water bottle and a scorpion was right beneath it. So it's never nothing is there.
Yeah.
Something is
Yeah.
there, something was there a long time ago. Poof. And that should be applied to anywhere we go. And I think that sounds the case for Zurich too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Let's see here. The like the voices and the dialogue, did you script them like in conversation with one another? Or did like kind of one character kind of sit and it did you develop like one character at a time, or are you kind of thinking about them in discourse, like from the beginning? But yeah, tell me a little bit about those voices.
No, it was more conventionally, a kind of not conventionally, but like a more internal monologue that I realized was an internal dialogue. Again, what we were talking about earlier about this kind of toggling between like guilt, like knowing better, like in pleasure and knowing better, or like
Right, right, right.
pleasure and guilt, and trying to find that in myself and give it a kind of voice. And that was actually the most uncomfortable part, was trying like separate those two voices somehow and give them a different one. And then the struggle of also like how do you materialize that voice. And so I ended up like wanting to speak to some kind of inner naivete or child, like, which is that this thing of like being totally tempted and consumed by this glowing device in front of me that produces things at a magical pace. And so without many children in my life apart from my 7-month-old child, I started using one of these um, like text to speech and speech to speech kind of offerings of AI, and exploring how to coax a kind of voice out of them. And so, you can run into interesting problems of like attributing a kind of emotion to text in these platforms, or in the one platform I ended up using. And if you like dial up anger all the way, you just get like a kind of like real time meltdown
Yeah.
or something. Um, and so that there was that kind of that process itself was kind of hard and interesting, and trying to find out where one thought ends and one thought overlaps with this internal dialogue that's expressed as a kind of external one.
Mm,
Was
yeah.
part of the problem in it.
Yeah. What comes next for this
I
particular
just
project?
yeah, I am like drowning in so many ideas. I mean, this is like attention towards geology, attention towards the earth is a kind of newer territory in the last couple of years, and I feel like I'm just overflowing with ideas, but really needing to find resources and time and to sort of work through them. But I think I hinted at one, which is, I think there are a series of these slightly more, let's say, active or software based, or maybe like software architectural based um, efforts, including like two separate games that might affect one another, right? To think about the kind of consequences of our actions on other parts of the earth or other communities. But equally, just a lot of sculptural ideas that start to bring earthliness and, um, you know, active or computational elements together. If that's a vague enough hint for what might come in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. I look forward to seeing what's next.